Welcome to Living Well with MS Coffee Break, a part of the Living Well with MS podcast family from Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity, celebrating its 10th year of serving the MS community. I'm your host, Jeff Alex. Today, you'll meet someone living with MS from our diverse and global Overcoming MS community. Our Coffee Break series invites you into the lives of each guest. They share their personal MS journeys and speak openly about their challenges and victories, large and small. We hope you find some common cause and a source of inspiration from the stories of these very special people. You can check out our show notes for more information and useful links. You can find these on our website at overcomingms.org/podcast. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about us on your social media channels or leave a review wherever you tune into our podcast. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to Living Well with MS on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. So, get your favourite beverage ready and let's meet today's guest on Living Well with MS Coffee Break. Welcome to Living Well with MS Coffee Break number 35, where we're pleased to welcome Leah Tsirigotis as our guest. Leah, welcome to Living Well with MS Coffee Break.
Thank you.
And did I get the pronunciation? I've met your husband, but did I get the pronunciation of your surname right?
You did, yeah.
Yeah. And we're so pleased to welcome you on our programme. The purpose of the Coffee Break series is to get to know some of the diverse members of our community from around the world, and today you're in the hot seat. So this is a bit of a departure from a typical Coffee Break in that your husband is on the OMS programme rather than yourself. But we do think it's a vital perspective to understand what it's like to be a partner of someone with MS, especially when they're making the lifestyle changes involved with following OMS, and how that affects their spouse and their family. So could you tell us a bit about your day-to-day life as a partner of someone on the OMS programme?
Gosh, okay. Yes, I can. So I guess, to be very frank, I mean, Alex was diagnosed 9 years ago, and so to be a part of someone on the OMS programme is quite natural to me. It's I can't really remember life before it. And yeah, it just seems very normal, but doesn't feel particularly out of the ordinary. But, you know, I would say day-to-day life is get up in the morning, get the kids ready for school. Alex, my husband, often goes for a morning run, and then we go to work. He often ends his day with some yoga and meditation. But I wouldn't say in the world we live in right now that's particularly unique to kind of live your life that way. It maybe was 10 years ago when we first started. But yeah, it's pretty quite standard. I guess to maybe answer more specifically OMS or being a partner of someone with MS, I guess, you know, it can be very varied. And, you know, there's days when maybe more is required from myself for him specifically. So, you know, he might be having a day where he's struggling a little bit with more fatigue or some brain fog. He specifically, some of his issues are centered around vision and balance. So he might be having a day where he's, you know, his head's just quite full of stuff. And he needs I need to step in a little bit more there. Fill, you know, gaps around the house, like, you know, help sorting the kids out or making meals or, you know, having empathy, I think is kind of one of the things that kind of comes in day to day. This isn't, you know, just him being unwell or something. It's something that he's struggling with day to day and trying to kind of battle through. And, you know, and for yourself, that can sometimes be, you know, I have a very busy job, we've got 2 kids, so it can be quite busy. You know, sometimes you yourself feel a bit tired, you want to chill, you want to do all of that, and sometimes you have to step up a little bit more. But I'm kind of quite used to that. It feels like we've been living this way forever. So it doesn't feel unusual. In terms of OMS specifically and where that kind of plays in, I've never known Alex with MS and not on the OMS programme. So we were quite fortunate when he was first diagnosed, I think within like 48 hours, we found the program. I don't think we really slept for about 2 days, and did lots and lots of research, and kept coming across things around diet, lifestyle being really, really important, and then navigated somehow to the OMS program. It was just something that really resonated with Alex specifically, but, you know, I also kind of resonated with it as well. So, you know, it's definitely, OMS has definitely shifted the direction in which our lives have gone, both, you know, with MS and without MS, in terms of the path it's taken us down, like our values, how we look at life and how we look at taking, you know, care of ourselves has definitely shifted. We didn't have kids when Alex was diagnosed. So our kids have been brought up, you know, in that world as well, and know very little different to, I hate saying this, living a normal life. You know, what we do is very normal to us. But, you know, as a family, you know, we relatively similarly now. It wasn't something I adopted right at the beginning, but, you know, myself and the kids, I wouldn't say we follow the OMS program, but we have a lot of synergies. So we also, you know, have chosen not to have meat and dairy in our diets, but we do eat things like the whole egg. We will have things like coconut, things like that where Alex might not. But generally, you know, we eat together really well as a family. And, you know, we cook from scratch. We also eat ready-made food sometimes. We eat out. We've both got jobs. You know, we've got a lot of stuff going on with our kids. We've got an active, you know, social life, lots of friends and community of people, lots of self-care activities. You know, Alex specifically does a lot of meditation, exercising. Running is something that he took up after MS diagnosis. Yoga, sleep, we watch films, listen to podcasts, do reading. And it's also kind of spurred on interests that we have that we didn't have before. So, I mean, for me specifically, you know, I really started exploring kind of maybe more like natural ways of living, and really starting to connect to self and the body and listening to the body and how we treat the body. So I've done studying around things like homeopathy and nutrition. I'm currently studying naturopathy. Our daily products that we use. I've become an advocate for kind of natural skincare, and I work with people in that realm as well. All of these things are completely new and things that we never thought we would be doing. And I would say all of that has stemmed from both being a partner to someone with on the OMS program, but that has just really kind of shifted how we've looked at kind of taking charge of our health and our lives. So yeah,
I certainly.
Sorry, long answer.
No, it's great. I certainly think increasingly. Like, I know a number of people with other conditions, from Parkinson's to cancer and all sorts. And if they are shown a sort of holistic approach, it's often so similar, and you just actually start to realise. And in fact, something my neurologist said to me as well when I said, "What do you think about me following this?" And he said, "Well, actually, it's just healthy for everyone." And he said, actually, all the stuff like mindfulness, definitely. Now, vitamin D, the NHS in the UK are now saying everyone should take vitamin D, which is completely counter to when I first started doing it, when a GP said to me, "Oh, you shouldn't take extra vitamin D." And now they're actually saying that's official guidance. The whole food-based diet absolutely is like good for everyone. So there's so much now, actually, you sort of think, well, this is almost, it's not even just an MS thing. It's almost getting to the point of, it's almost mainstream, like this is good for you. So
yeah, and I think that's why it feels so normal to us now. I mean, when this first started, it was very out of the ordinary, and explaining it to people was really challenging. They really struggled to get their head around it, and we struggled to explain it. And it was very much from a perspective of, oh, Alex has MS, and this is very specific to MS, this very specific diet and lifestyle. So much so that, you know, for quite a while, I didn't adopt any really practices myself of any of this at all, because this was very specific to MS and I didn't have MS, so I didn't need to do it. And that thinking, very much changed in the first kind of 2 years, I would say, where I actually started, doing that connection and research and informing and reading around health in general, where I actually realised, actually this is not just specific to MS at all. It is exactly like you say, specific to so many, autoimmune conditions and other diseases. And it's about just for me anyway, just incorporating as many of these things as you can. It's not about being perfect and, go off to a restaurant and I'll order chips and, do you know what I mean? It's about enjoying life as well, but it's just about doing the best that you can, and being informed and making, good choices so that, not only do you reduce your risk to something like MS, if it is something that you're potentially predisposed to with family, connections to that, but also so many other illnesses as well that are just rampant as, people get older, trying to kind of reduce that and learn how to manage something like that if you were to be, posed with a diagnosis or something like that. So,
for another question, so we talk quite a lot about diagnosis and how that feels, and it's quite unique, I think, sort of people, how they feel when they're first told that they've got MS. But what we don't talk about is how it is for the spouse. And I think I'm certainly conscious of that because my wife was with me when when I was diagnosed, and you sort of thinking, how you feel, but also it's a huge thing for the partner as well. So how did you deal with your husband's diagnosis, and what were your initial reactions? How you managed that?
This is something that still feels like it was yesterday. It's really fresh. I don't know if I'll ever forget it, but I remember exactly where I was, and I was 5 months pregnant at the time. We just found out it was our first child. We just found out we were having a girl, like, I don't know, a week or so before. And I knew that Alex he'd kind of been like, struggling with my vision or different things, but it wasn't a continuous thing. It was just kind of very soft, and he was just kind of mentioning it. And in my head, I just thought, vision, migraines. My mum used to have migraines. He used to affect her vision. That's probably what he's experiencing. Didn't think much more of it. He'd been having physiotherapy at the time he used to play a lot of football, like 3-4 times a week, in like amateur leagues. And he'd had an injury, an ACL injury. And so he'd had an operation and then had been out recovering for probably 3 or 4 months, and then had started getting back into football and would come home and be like, kind of fell over a few times when I was playing football, or I kept missing shots. And it was just kind of like passing things, and he was getting frustrated with how long it was taking him to get back to the level that he was before. And never in a million years did I personally think that there was anything untoward going on. What I didn't realise was that he did in his head, but he hadn't really communicated that. I don't know if it's because I was pregnant or whatever, but in his head, he was thinking something a lot more severe. He had a friend who'd recently been diagnosed with a brain tumour and things like that. So his head was going quite deep. So anyway, I was 5 months pregnant, at home after work. He was like, I've got an appointment for another checkup with something. Wasn't important enough for me to go along. Didn't think it was going to be anything. And he called me and he was like, I've got great news. The doctor told me what he thinks might be wrong with me. So I said, okay. He's like, I don't have, I don't have cancer or anything like that. So it's fantastic. He's like, yeah. Like he just thinks I've got something called MS. At which point I kind of re-questioned, sorry, did you say, he said he thinks you've got MS? And he was like, yeah, brilliant. And I just broke down instantly on the phone. And my experience with MS was limited, but was, not a positive one. And he wasn't expecting that. He really understood what was my reaction. But then, he then had a 45-minute journey home. And I was a bit of a mess initially to deal with that. And I think kind of the next few days. So I don't think we really slept that night. My instant reaction was, I will find a cure for this, and we will, we'll overcome this. Obviously quite naively, but didn't sleep, stayed up all night doing a lot of reading. Went to work the next day, as normal, both of us did, didn't stop. Went to work, got on with the day, came home, carried on researching. He was diagnosed on a Thursday night. I think by the Sunday night, he had made a decision to go with the OMS program. We'd actually, as I said, we did a lot of reading, but there was actually, serendipitously on the Saturday, an article in a newspaper that was talking about the OMS program, and it was a whole full-page spread about someone who has MS, and it's one of those things where you're like, wow, how has this happened 2 days after I found out about it? And it was actually an article, I think George and OMS had launched maybe that year or the year before, and he was coming over to do the first conference, I think, in Brighton, either that weekend or the weekend before, so there'd been some news about it, and we read about this, and we'd already seen it as part of our research, so we went kind of back to the website, ordered the book, read through it, and Alex just really connected with it. I think there were maybe some stories, I think potentially mainly George's, but a few stories on the website at that time of people who were living well and had adopted this program and, had been living with MS for a few years, quite a lot of years, following this type of lifestyle. And it just was something that he just decided to pretty much adopt instantly. So by the end of that weekend, he'd adopted it. And I think, that was the initial diagnosis. The next 6 months plus were really tough. I think mentally he was going through a lot. Well, we both were, but him specifically. And I think it's hard enough going through something like a diagnosis where you just don't know what's going to happen in the future and wanting time to speed along so you could see what's going to happen. But also when you decide to make a decision like going down a route of quite radically changing your life at that time, that's a huge thing for anyone as well. And to be doing both at the same time was going to be a real challenge. So, I kind of just stepped in and stepped up at that point and just tried to allow him the space to be able to just process what was going on without having to worry about some of like the basic things of life. So, started taking lots of different vitamins. I'd get all those out of him, make his meals, make packed lunches, try and take his mind off, I'm really hungry, what can I eat, what can't I eat, and make that really simple for him. Supported him with, learning how to meditate. And he came to the realisation he wasn't going to be able to play football anymore, and that had been such a huge part of his life. And there was a real mental health aspect of this that I think at the time was overlooked and thankfully seems to become, again, more mainstream. People are talking about it a lot more. But that was really difficult, I think, for a male at that point to be going through something like that and not, not knowing what to do with those feelings. So really just kind of, just trying to step in and hold him together and try and positively, take each day as it comes, whilst also wanting time to speed up so that you can see what happens.
So in adopting the OMS program, so specifically, for you, but more actually for having a young family, what are some of the challenges that you've had to overcome with Alex adopting OMS? It's got to be, because kids are fussy enough anyway. So in terms of eating and things like, how do you deal with the sort of challenges? Is it just like, do the kids, they don't have a choice? Or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, interesting one. So specifically with kids, fortunately, our kids, weren't born when we adopted this. So it is somewhat, really natural to them. But obviously as they grow up and they're at school and they see, oh, this person eats that or does that or whatever. You get questions, and we've always tried to be just like really honest and open with them, and not try and take away a choice from them, but educate them around why we at this stage in our lives feel it's appropriate for us to, carry out a certain activity or be mindful of something or eat a certain food. And thus far, they've been quite open to that. They never look at it as, oh, I can't have something or I'm doing something completely different. I think kids are quite, they listen, they ask a question, you answer that question honestly and openly. And they're just like, okay, makes sense. That said, it is a challenge. They are children. Locked down, I can't remember how many times I got asked, what can I eat? What snacks? Are there any snacks? And, sometimes you can feel, I definitely did at the beginning, kind of like, oh, they're going to miss out on this, that, or the other. I think it can be a challenge sometimes to get them to eat a variety of food. When they were younger, it was easier. As they grow up, they start developing their own opinions about what they like and what they don't like. We try to eat as much as we can the same food at the same time. I think that's really helpful. I try and educate. Our daughter's older, and I think she understands quite a lot more about making healthy choices and understanding what's a healthy choice and what's not, but having the choice to make that choice, within the realms of what we eat. I think another thing, as a family eating very similarly means we don't have food in the house that no one can't eat. So everything in the house is open to everyone, and I think that's really helpful. I think it would be a struggle if you had, cupboards that were out of bounds for specifically children as well, because then they, do feel like something's being pushed on them. But we're just quite open, to anything. If they like something, they eat all of it. If they don't want something, then they choose not to eat that. And I try not to put too much pressure on food. I think there can be a lot of negative connotations around that. You can eat this, you can't eat it. This is bad for you. This is really good for you, and just allow them to come to that experience on their own. When we make new meals, sometimes I might just sit and eat a new meal on my own, and they might have had something else, and then actually they come over and they're like, oh, what's that? That looks really interesting, and then they'll try it. They'll be like, oh, next time I'll have that, without putting this pressure on. You have to still eat this meal, and that thus far has worked. They're not perfect at all. As I said, Alex is definitely the healthiest out of all of us in terms of the foods, but they'll have crisps. There's plenty of vegan biscuits. They're definitely not the healthiest choice for any children, but there are, and I think having that there as well lets them know they're not missing out on anything, and it's not something they have all the time. And if you restrict anyone from having anything, they want it more. So we kind of keep it open, and they're very good at asking questions when they're with other people as well. Like, does this have this in that? If they say, oh, it's got milk in it or something, they're like, no worries, I won't have that. It's not a big deal. Yeah. And I think we're really fortunate with that. I imagine it'd be harder if they were 10 and we were all of a sudden sitting them down and being like, we're radically changing your diet.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of more where I was at with my kids, because they were that sort of age. But I think you like that idea of just educating them, because so where my kids are at now, my son will be going off to university, so we'll have no control over what he eats. And we don't. He actually is away Monday to Friday, or was when he was at school. So then he had, he could do what he wanted really, but they're educated into why you're doing this, and but we're not sort of scaring them and saying you're going to get MS, because actually they still have a very low chance, even as a family member. But it's like, well, even if you don't, this is good for you, and you're massively reducing your chances of getting MS. And so just educating them, and because I know that he's going away next year and he could eat any sort of rubbish. Now, there is an element, yeah, like as you say, Alex is the most healthy, and I probably am in my family. I think, he certainly well aware of. He'll look on a packet and go, look, it doesn't have any dairy, and it's no saturated fat. And I'm going, yeah, but it is entirely made of sugar and chemicals.
Processed foods that you can't go buy off the shelf.
It's like there is an element of like that's not good for anyone. So he sometimes gets that a bit wrong, but then it's so much healthier than what I'd imagine what I ate when I grew up. And
I often revert back to that and think I've got to where I am now, so I can only trust that my kids will do the same. And it's trust, but I think you're completely right. It's the education point. If someone understands why they're doing something or is informed about something, then they're making an informed choice, whether that choice is the best choice or not. At least they know the outcomes of that. And for me, it's I kind of try and teach the kids about like connection to your body and connection to the food. So if you're eating something, let's take MS out of it, but if you're eating something and it makes you feel a certain way, so, a negative feeling, like it makes you feel really bloated, you need to go lie down, or it makes you feel sick or gives you a headache or something, connect with that and be aware of that and try and identify what it is that's doing that. Similarly, if, you eat something and it makes you feel like you've got loads of energy and it gives you really positive side effects, recognize that as well. And you'll start making choices that work for your body as well. And again, I think that's probably one of the best things as well, because the reality is all these, processed foods and everything that are, naturally around. And I'm never going to say to my kids, well, you can't eat this or this because it's not a banana, it's not a whole food. But actually, they'll start realizing, actually, do you know what, when I eat that, I get this satisfaction immediately, but after I just feel really this and that. And then it means I can't go off and play with my friends in the park as I want to, or I can't do this or I can't do that. And I think that for me is the main thing to probably teach anyone, but definitely what I've been trying to kind of go through with my kids. So that they just kind of have that connection so that when they get older, whatever choices they make, they're making the right choices for them and their body.
And on a sort of more positive note, did you start to see positive effects of a healthier lifestyle for Alex and also for yourself?
Yeah. For Alex, it probably felt like a longer stretch. It felt like quite a long time to see benefits, I guess of the whole program, but also food as well. So he was kind of given an initial diagnosis by the neurologist, who then said, okay, well, we now need to go and do a few other different tests, lumbar punctures and all that kind of thing. But he obviously started MS, a few days after that initial diagnosis. And then as part of the next few steps, I think 2 months after, he had an MRI and it came back and it had 2 more lesions, and it just kind of felt like, oh, he's been doing this diet for 2 months and this lifestyle and he's got more lesions. It's really frustrating. It's obviously not working for him, all of that. And that felt really real at the time. And looking back now, it's just quite clear that things don't necessarily change. You can make a change overnight, but, the effects of 30 years of the way that you've been treating your body doesn't take, a day, 2 months, 24 hours to overcome. Certain things do change very quickly. So it did feel like a really long time. And it was also clouded by the emotions of everything that was going on. But, a year after that, he had an MRI and he had no new lesions. A year after that, again, no new lesions. In the 3rd year, it was no new lesions, plus some of the lesions had disappeared. After 4 years, it was the same. So it was kind of like, oh, wow, this is doing something. But it can be frustrating in those first years, which feel like the longest ever, to see, I guess, pure science, on an MRI. In terms of physically and, day to day, probably earlier than 3-4 years. I think the first 18 months were very up and down and tough. He, in some ways, became a lot fitter. He started running and really developed that and was getting you want to use speed as a metric, was getting faster and faster as he was going. And so that was a really positive. He wasn't a runner before this at all. I think he'd done like one running event that I'd seen him at before and really struggled. And he started doing 5Ks, 10Ks, and then built himself up to a marathon, and then started doing a few marathons and was getting faster, and they were becoming easier to him. And he was, before he used to run, and then after he finished the run, he would just collapse. And he would stop that collapsing, and might just need a few minutes to kind of get his vision back, and it would be good. So they were really positive steps that we saw. Another thing that really helped, actually not necessarily directly to do with diet, but very OMS related, was he went to a retreat in Austria, probably about 2 years after diagnosis. And I mean, that was hugely transformative. For him, it was a huge turning point mentally. And I think that his mindset really shifted. And I think that was quite a big burden that came off of him that had been, pulling him down. Meeting other people in exactly the same, well, not exactly the same, but a very similar situation to you, who are approaching things in a very similar way. And seeing people who have just been diagnosed versus people who, have been on this program and diagnosed for, 10 plus years, and seeing how different people are coping and managing. And that was really, I think, huge for him. I don't think before that he'd met too many people who either had MS or were taking an approach that he had taken. And, a huge level of positivity returned into his life. And I think at that point, life started really returning to what I would say like normal, but a positive kind of step forward, where we weren't necessarily thinking about MS every single day. All of that is just down to time. It's a huge mental challenge when you're diagnosed with something like that.
I think that community aspect's really important as well. I mean, that's not part of any program. It's not part of the OMS program that you need to have community. But when you're diagnosed, you're diagnosed as an individual. I mean, or possibly with your family, but certainly not with other people with MS. You don't, and I don't see anyone else. I see my MS nurse and I see my neurologist, and so there's no form of, because it's private, isn't it? You never go to a doctor and say, oh, here's the other people who've got flu. You see them on your own. So there's no community. And so you're like on your own. I mean, you live in London, which is obviously quite a lot of people there. I mean, and so even then you're still like quite isolated. And so who do you talk to? And that community has been really important to me, where you start to get, whether it's an OMS community or broader, and actually, so part of it actually, because I have my neurologist runs weekly exercise courses, and that's been really good there for people with neurological conditions, but we kind of quickly work out who's got what, and so there's sort of, and actually I get on with it's not just people with MS, but because we've all got similar sort of symptoms actually, but there's a sort of community there. But that's the only sort of purely medical side where actually we have that group of people. So the OMS circles has been really beneficial in that you actually have a community where I can talk to people, and they know what you're going through. Although I say it's unique to each of us, but we kind of understand that as well. So there's an understanding there.
Yeah, and I think that was what one of the first books we bought. We bought the original OMS book, and then there was a Recovering from MS, like personal stories book, and that, I think the OMS book with all its science was great, because it really actually helped you understand, why am I doing this, which I think is really important to understand when anyone decides to start doing any kind of change that they might struggle to stick with. It's actually understanding, what is it that I'm doing this for, and what's it going to do to my body? Otherwise, it's easy to just kind of be like, I don't see immediate changes, and therefore not continue. But the Recovering from MS book was just the perfect, pairing with that book, because it put it into real life people. These people exist. Some of the stories in there are people who've really, been at rock bottom at the point of diagnosis, or even before they were diagnosed, and seeing their journey and the steps that they took and where they got to. And that was so positive in terms of reading that and thinking, okay, this isn't just some program that may or may not work, that, I'm just going to give a try. It's something where someone wasn't doing something, they were experiencing X, and they started incorporating, these pillars into their life, and their life changed. And that was really, really helpful early on when you didn't have a community of people to go and talk to, and to be able to read those stories and think, okay, it just gave you a level of hope, and it helped that whole kind of feeling of, I want to know what's going to happen in 3, 4, 5 years time from now. It kind of suppressed that a little bit, and you thought, well, actually, I'm just going to get on with this, and hopefully I'm experiencing similar things that hundreds of other people have experienced as well.
So talking of books, the most recent Overcoming MS book, the Overcoming MS Handbook, which was this time edited by Professor George Jelinek rather than written by him. So, or he's co-editor, and has a number of different authors. And you are actually an author of a chapter on prevention. So could you tell us a bit about your experience working on the project for that book?
So I've kind of written a personal story that goes alongside a chapter around family and MS. And, or at least I think that's what it's called. I should know. But it's definitely to do with families. And I just woke up one morning to an email from George inviting me to write a personal excerpt for this new book, and then it kind of outlined everything about the book. It was really interesting to read through the concept of the book, kind of in its infancy at that point, and see how it was designed to fit with the newest version of the OMS Handbook that I think came out, I don't know, towards the end of last decade. And actually the book I've just mentioned was one of the books that the recovering stories. This felt like a good pairing with the new book in the same way that had felt like a brilliant pairing with the original version of the OMS book, which was to have, people with MS writing these chapters from a personal perspective that, that can be quite uplifting and helpful to people who are newly diagnosed or new to the program and just looking for hope. And that's kind of, I was a bit skeptical as to whether I could kind of deliver or live up to the pressure I was putting on myself to do with this, and I'm not sure I achieved that. But yeah, it was quite an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Even just to write, it was like 500 words or something, to get as much into that as possible, to just potentially connect with another husband, wife, partner, whoever, of someone who's trying to hold it together for their partner because maybe their partner's really struggling and they're like, I've got to step up. But they need to know that there's other people out there who've experienced the same, and what have they done and how have they come through it. And as I said, I don't know that I achieved that necessarily. But it was a lot of pressure, but it was really exciting to be part of it, and seeing emails, going back and forth and seeing all the different people involved. They're all people from the community within OMS who are living day to day with MS, all in different ways, and all kind of focused on their specialist areas as well. Which was, it obviously very honoured to have been chosen or thought of. But yeah, tried my best.
And could you, just very quickly, because this could take up a whole episode, but so preventing MS, or I know you can't, it's not a sort of on-off switch, but things you could do to prevent MS for family members, what would be some of the key things that would be worth considering?
I think education is a key one, which I know we've spoken a lot about. So really understanding MS and what it does to the body, and what options there are for, in your control for you to be doing, and understanding why you would do those. So I think being informed is really, really important. Understanding that genetics do play a part, but not everything. And I think, I don't want to misquote, but I always have this number in my head, so don't take this as a quote. Please go off and do your own research. But, I think it's something like genetics play 30% a part in the role of you potentially developing something that you are genetically predisposed to. And it's not everything. And the other 70% is everything else around that, which is basically lifestyle. So if you have a family member that has, and we'll take MS, but this will be relevant for so many different conditions, depending on that family connection that you have. So I think a sibling is probably one of the most highest because you've got the most closest genetic makeup. But if you have a parent and so forth, your risk of developing something like MS will be higher than potentially someone who has nothing within their family. Although I say that, we're not aware that Alex had any family in his, anyone in his family who had MS, that your risk will be higher. But knowing that doesn't have to be everything. And so therefore, I think this whole, which is the view that we took with our kids, is that, yes, okay, MS is probably higher on the list than maybe something else for them. And so therefore, we're going to look at how can we, help support them to build a good lifestyle for themselves, including not just food. And I think food gets looked at, as the first piece, but our kids know how to meditate and they don't look at that as anything weird or obscure. Our daughter, knows if she's getting stressed about anything or is feeling anxious about anything, exactly what she needs to do with her body to go and do that. For her, she goes off and does 20 cartwheels. She knows that movement's going to help her do all of those things. And so we've just been, we don't sit down and teach the kids, but we just kind of lead by example, specifically for our kids, but also, food, just the way that we live our lives, being active is really important for us. Being mindful of the fact that they can go on, just like you said, your son's about to go to university, so you're going to have very little control and maybe have had little control since he's been quite a bit older. I'm fully aware of that, but I'd like to give them a really strong foundation and platform to build on from the beginning, and the education for them to understand any kind of condition. There's a lot of control that you can have if you go off and, understand what's going on. And there's a whole load of benefits to specifically, the OMS program, as we said at the beginning, on different conditions. So I think like heart disease is the leading, the number one leading killer in the world. Whole food plant-based diets are proven to, to support things like that, as well as lots of other different conditions that are out there. So, yeah, sorry, I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but I think education is always a really important part, and having someone understand that it's not just you said you can't have this or you should do that. Education them to why is a really big thing for me.
So, Leah, thank you so much for joining us on the Living Well with MS coffee break to let the community get to know you a bit better. But we have one last question, which we have as a bit of a tradition for our coffee break guests. And that is specific with you. If you tap into your experience as being a spouse of someone with MS and part of a family of someone who had adopted the OMS approach, could you share a piece of wisdom, maybe for people who are newly diagnosed or newly following the OMS program, how you could make it more easy to adopt the OMS program?
Yeah, gosh, a hard one, but I think taking it day by day and not, try your best and know that will be good enough, and don't put too much pressure or worry or overthink things too much. If 1 week you achieve nothing else but meditating for 5 minutes every day, that's a step forward from the week before. Next week, try and incorporate something else. And, if you get to the end of one day and you've missed something, or you ate something that you wish you hadn't eaten, or you didn't intend to eat, don't obsess over it too much, because the stress of doing something like that, it isn't worth it. It'd be worse than having gone off and eaten something incorrectly or missed a meditation anyway. And I think that's really important. And probably the other side is just really understand and connect with why it is that you're doing what you're doing. So don't just do it because you've read in the book that that's what you should do. Do it because it feels like it's the right thing for you to do, and understand the implications of of doing it well and then potentially doing 50% of it and make sure that you're happy with whatever choices that you're making with all of that, and start connecting with your body, its condition, the symptoms that you're experiencing, how you respond to an activity, a food, whatever it is, and how you feel with all of that, and kind of build your own individual OMS program that works for you. This is a guideline of things that you can do. So if you want to do something that's not on there and it feels good to you and you get benefits, go do it. If you try something that doesn't work for you, that isn't a program, then you don't have to do it. But it's never going to be sustainable if you try and do something that doesn't feel natural. So always kind of reconnect back to what feels right for yourself.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Leah Tsirigotis.
No. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS Coffee Break. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find all sorts of useful links and bonus information there. Do you have questions about this episode, or do you or someone you know want to be featured in a future Coffee Break episode? Then email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Living Well with MS Coffee Break is kindly supported by a grant from the Happy Charitable Trust. If you'd like to support the Overcoming MS charity and help keep our podcast advertising free, you can donate online at overcomingms.org/donate. To learn more about Overcoming MS and its array of free content and programs, including webinars, recipes, exercise guides, OMS circles, our global network of community support groups, and more, please visit our website at overcomingms.org. While you're there, don't forget to register for our monthly e-newsletter so you can stay informed about the podcast and other news and updates from Overcoming MS. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time. The Living Well with MS family of podcasts is for private, non-commercial use and exists to educate and inspire our community of listeners. We do not offer medical advice. For medical advice, please contact your doctor or other licensed healthcare professional. Our guests are carefully selected, but all opinions they express are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Overcoming MS charity, its affiliates, or staff.